So, Янис, you're a very interesting combination of idealism and pragmatism. You identified the problem that we have here, which led to somehow Trump being elected. Yet, that terrible income inequality, which has gotten way worse in the last 12 months and looks like it's going to get worse, even more, get worse again, did not produce enough people to elect Bernie Sanders. And I went to his rallies and he said great things. Do you think that this country just can't wrap its head around that word socialist? And that's my question, is does it have to repackage the thinking?
Well, I used to think that until Bernie Sanders called himself a socialist and won the primary election before it was stolen from him. Bernie Sanders won the election, or he would have won the election if the National Democratic Committee did not do its utmost to perform a coup d'etat against him. And this, I'm stating this as an accusation. The Democratic Party is its own worst enemy.
So given that, this is the substrate that we have to work with, how do we change the thinking? If we want the things that that party is proposing, how do we get the electorate to change their voting? Why did they vote for Trump? Why?
Well, firstly, the abstention rate was quite high. A lot of good people could simply not bring themselves to vote for Hillary, and they didn't vote at all. And many others. I wasn't here during your election campaign, but I was in Britain before the Brexit referendum, and I believe that there are great similarities between the two. And I remember I was campaigning against Brexit in Britain, in the same way I would have campaigned against Trump here, of course. And I remember asking people who were not racist, who were not xenophobic, who were not right-wing, who were not anti-European, why are you voting for Brexit? And the answer had nothing to do with Europe. The answer was this: if I vote to remain in the European Union, those bastards that have been treating me like a discarded piece of rag, a discarded rag, are going to be very happy. So I'm going to cast my vote in a manner that maximizes the discomfort of those who've been treating me as if I'm not a human. Now, I don't know, you have to tell me whether this is an appropriate comparison to what was going on here. A lot of people who voted for Trump simply wanted to punish the establishment. And they wanted, I think that there's quite a lot of supporting evidence. Of course, there are racists, and there are Nazis, and there are right-wingers, and bigots, and misogynists who voted for Trump. But I don't think that those were the ones who made the difference. The ones who made the difference were the ones who could not afford a car, the ones who had believed in Obama and who voted for Obama in 2008. I'm reading at the data, and there seems to be a very large number of voters who voted for Obama in 2008 and Trump in 2016. Now, that cannot be explained on the basis of racism. It cannot be explained on the basis of misogyny. It is simply, to hell with you. I am not going to vindicate, yet again, a presidential candidate who goes into Wall Street 6 months before the presidential election, gives private speeches for hundreds of thousands of dollars, and, excuse the language, shits on people like me in front of the bankers, calling me names, and promising to them that they will be allowed to continue doing that which has put us and our country in this position.
So, trying to be optimistic here for a moment. If we were trying to create some kind of apparatus, I mean, in the 50s, Roosevelt did the very thing that they said was impossible. He put 90% tax on corporate America to fund all these great schemes, the Social Security system, Medicare. These things were made possible, but the workers had unions then, quite strong unions. Now that's all been taken away. How are people going to organise and overthrow the system? As you say, I mean, it may implode, but in the interim, people are just surviving on $10 an hour wages or not surviving. So where is the impetus for revolution?
You do not need punitive tax rates now. You don't need 90%. This was a gimmick anyway.
No, but it worked. It worked.
Yeah, I mean, it was more of a political stunt. I don't believe that it is necessary to have such high tax rates. But what you do need is you need to change the discourse in a way that appeals not only to those who would have joined trade unions, but to people who would never have imagined themselves to be radical or even progressive. So let me give you an example. Take NAFTA. There's a lot of discussion in this country now about NAFTA. The liberal establishment says, oh, you know, free trade is everything. The pie is going to shrink if you do away with it. But some people in the Rust Belt say, well, that's your pie, that's not my pie. My pie has disappeared a long time ago. So if I can manage to hold on to a few, steel workers' jobs by means of tariffs, let's do it, because it's better than all of us being thrown into the dustbin. Why not change the narrative and to say, yes, we want to renegotiate NAFTA, along the following lines. If Mexico wants to continue to have, or Mexican capitalists want to continue to have free access to the American market, Mexico is going to have to introduce a minimum wage in Mexico that provides a living wage by Mexican standards, not by American standards, to the workers who work in the factories that produces stuff that are then transported over to the United States. Now, that is a progressive renegotiation of NAFTA. Not tariffs, but minimum living wages in the poorer countries. Okay, so that way...
Not building a wall.
Of course not building a wall. But then you wouldn't need to build the wall.
Of course you wouldn't, yeah? No.
So that is one example. Take, for instance, the question about the health service here, the health system. Well, you don't have a health system, the absence of a health system. Obamacare was a complete disaster. Obamacare is an affront against logic. The idea of universal cover is absolutely essential. But also the idea that the state is going to be subsidizing private companies to provide public health without any controls regarding the prices of the services and the pharmaceuticals is a catastrophe. It's like effectively subsidizing the private insurers. This is why, of course, they contributed massively to Obama's campaign. Without the so-called public option, it's ludicrous. So how about the following argument about having a proper national health service, a public health service system in the United States, so that we can introduce tax cuts? Think about that. That would really throw the Republicans, wouldn't it? Because your health system is the most expensive in the world. You pay twice as much on health than the rest of the world, and you have far worse outcomes. So imagine that you created a proper public system. You'd save a huge amount of money, public money, and then you could give them away as tax cuts. But why not also say that those tax cuts will go to the lowest wage earners, not to the top? So that's how you change the debate. You get out of the way of the stereotype that the Republicans are trying to create for you,
Absolutely.
and you subvert the dominant way of thinking.
So I would like to hog the questioning, but I don't think it's fair, because I'm sure there are lots of good questions that are going to come from the audience. So I'm going to open up the questions. And
Okay.
if you could confine it to one, I would be appreciative.
It may be 1.5. I thought for a minute your talk was going to be almost entirely about Harvard. Marshall, who announced it at Harvard commencement, Kissinger, and then Larry Summers. I have this idea that maybe Obama was put in the White House to bail out Harvard, whose endowment went from losing $11 billion to regaining it. I think many people in this country are still not convinced that Obama did have a choice. Now, you said, I believe that he did, but can you be a little more specific about, and you sort of writ large, you talk about a New Deal. Could you be more specific about what a person in the White House could have done, what it would have looked like that would have been more like bailing out Wall Street, more like bailing out Main Street than bailing out Wall Street? And can you explain why the social democratic politics of building a politics where we control the government and regulate capitalism is not the way to go, but some other alternative politics is what you're implying, but you haven't really, I don't think, spelled out.
Okay, I'll start from the second part. Look, the New Deal that I am suggesting as a first step is social democratic, but in the good old-fashioned sense of it. So you need social democratic measures in order to stabilize the political economy before we can have a genuine conversation about what comes next, the more radical part. Creating, for instance, changing corporate law. I mean, corporate law is a political value judgment. So when some corporation goes bust, who gets paid first amongst the creditors is a political decision. So why not change it? Why have the bankers get paid first and the workers last? Why allow people to own shares in a company in which they don't work? This is very, very radical, I know. But imagine having a situation where you can only have shares in a company in which you actually provide labor. Now, then you have socialism, but without state control. So that's the part of the second question. But let's go back to Obama. Did he have a choice? Of course he had a choice. He could have appointed as instead of appointing Tim Geithner and Larry Summers, he could have appointed Elizabeth Warren with a mandate to save the banks, but to expropriate the bankers, which is not a new idea. In 1992, the Swedish banks, actually all the Scandinavian banks, went bust. And what the governments did then was to say to the bankers, okay, out. They took over the banks, they nationalized them, put in a new board of directors, and within 2 years they had sold them back to the private sector, but cleansed. The original bankers had gone, okay, with new regulations. He didn't do that. He left, Jamie Dimon, Goldman Sachs intact, all the structures of power. In 2009, when he moved into the White House, for about 6 to 8 months, I grant you, not more than that, he had a window of opportunity, he had the whole nation behind him, he could have done that, even Republicans would have, even libertarians would have approved of expropriating the bankers. He didn't. Instead, he allowed Larry and Tim to create the so-called Summers-Geithner plan. If you haven't studied that, go and study it. It is a remarkable, ingenious way of conjuring up around $9 trillion and giving it to the bankers without anybody realizing it. You remember the bailout that Hank Paulson came up with was $700 billion, and everybody went, $700 billion. Initially, he was defeated in Congress, and then he managed to push it through. $700 billion is peanuts. Geithner and Summers created $9 trillion without anybody realizing it. Okay? So Obama had a choice to do it, and he did it. Okay? Now we are paying for it because Trump is president.
I've been very concerned lately about China and sort of we have transferred so much money from our economy over to China by buying all those things and supporting their economy over there so they could make more and more money. They are now all over Africa, buying things and investing over there and getting those countries dependent on them and supporting, non-democratic people. And I'm just
like
wondering,
whom?
Well,
we are in a country that supports Saudi Arabia.
Yes, that's true. Right. So
suddenly we have a problem with, superpowers supporting non-democratic people?
Yes, yes, I do, but I also am just concerned that we've sort of created the economic power that China sort of has now, and they're using it, I fear, going to be using it against us eventually and against the better interests of a lot of people.
Allow me to put your mind to rest.
Okay, great.
You shouldn't worry about that.
Okay.
It's very simple. And let me explain why you shouldn't worry about that. But please continue.
Well, you know, they're in Africa. They're lending money to countries to build ports and different infrastructure.
To build what?
Port harbors.
And what's wrong with that?
And, well, because...
Countries that need ports get ports.
But they're making people dependent on... I mean, I know, it's the same thing that we've done, which is
No, it's not.
horrible around the world.
They are far more humanistic than the United States ever was.
Really? Okay.
Absolutely.
Great. So...
Let me give you an example. Of course they are peddling for influence.
Yeah.
Yeah? But they are non-interventionist. Absolutely non-interventionist in a way that Europeans, the West, has never managed to fathom.
But I have a feeling they have a longer-term thought process that is more interventionist.
All right. But anyway, let's judge what we see. Let's judge what...
Okay.
Well, let's start at the beginning. The Chinese never asked Apple to go to Shenzhen and produce all the iPhones. It was Steve Jobs that decided that. Yeah? Mm-hmm. It was not China that went to Washington, D.C. and demanded that they buy a third of your national debt. If they hadn't bought it, you would be in serious trouble. Mm-hmm. Okay. Number 3. I did allude to this in my talk. If in 2008 China had not cranked up their credit bubble, you would be in a new Great Depression now. Mm-hmm. So, China, the United States, and the European Union are absolutely synergistic, and they need one another in a way that if we fail to acknowledge and to nurture, billions of people, including the majority of the people in this country, are going to suffer. Now, I am not going to stand here and defend China and the Chinese Communist Party. I already made some negative remarks about the Chinese Communist Party in referring to, their attitudes as being compatible with those of Wolfgang Schäuble. My concern about China is the authoritarian manner in which the Chinese regime is treating the Chinese people. As a Democrat, I have a problem with this. Mind you, I have to tell you that, from my understanding of China, it's a very interesting social experiment, in the sense that at the local level, or the regional level, you now have a boisterous democracy. At the local and regional level. Even with popular success stories in overthrowing local authorities, local bureaucrats who have been corrupt, who have been this, who have been that, who have been the other. When it comes to the influence of China outside its borders, I have to say, firstly, it's quite remarkable that they don't seem to have any military ambitions. Secondly, Africa. I'll give you an example, a specific example. Ethiopia. 2004, because I happened to be there, and I have some first-hand experience of it. They went into Ethiopia. I'll tell you why they went into Ethiopia, because they suspected there was oil. Mm-hmm. Because China is a major industrial power, but it lacks primary resources. Now, instead of going into Africa with troops, colonially, destroying the country, killing people like the West has done for the last 100 years, what they did was they went to Addis Ababa and they said to the government, we would like, we can see you have problems with your infrastructure, we would like to build some new airports, upgrade your railway system, create a telephone system, and rebuild your roads. And we'll do this all for free. No strings attached. We don't want anything from you. And they did. Why did they do it? Because it's soft power. Because because they knew that if oil is discovered, and it was discovered later, then, of course, the Ethiopian government will be much more open to Chinese oil companies coming there. They have never combined their investment with imperialistic view. When I was Minister of Finance, I had a very interesting experience with Costco, one of the Chinese national companies that in the end bought the port of Piraeus. When I moved into the ministry, I found a contract from the previous government that they had already sold the port of Piraeus for a pittance and other ridiculous conditions to the Chinese, under the guidance, of course, of the European Union and the International Monetary Fund as well. And in other words, as a minister, I was bound to a particular deal that was terrible for Greece. And I went to the Chinese and discussed it with them. And I was really astonished. I said to them, look, you're paying too little, you're not committing to a sufficient level of investment, and you are treating our workers as fodder. You are effectively subcontracting labor to horrible companies that exploit the workers, and I can't deal with this. Effectively, I proposed to them to renegotiate the contract. So instead of getting 67% of the shares of the port, they would get with the same price 51. The remaining shares would go into the Greek pension fund system in order to bolster the capitalization of the public pensions. Secondly, I want you to commit to 180 million euros of investment within 12 months. And thirdly, proper collective bargaining with the trade unions and no subcontracting of labor. And to my astonishment, they said, okay. Can you imagine if that was a German company or an American company? That's why I'm saying I don't think you should worry.
Okay, I won't.
Hi. Hi. Big fan, Янис. Nice to see you in person. And I hope you don't mind that I'll struggle to give you a short question instead of an essay. So basically, one angle that I kind of feel was missing from tonight's talk is the angle of class formations. Mm-hmm. So the New Deal was born out of, I believe, about easily 50, 60 years of left-wing organizing among the industrial working classes who basically, you know, as we would always say in our slogans, had their hands on the wheels. When they went on strike, they could stop production, stop the flow of profits, and so on and so on. And so by the time the Great Depression came, there was a crisis. There was a place for labor and the left at the bargaining table. I guess what I want to ask is, let's take neoliberalism out of kind of good faith and say there really was a change in the class formation that allowed them to just throw out Bretton Woods and say, we don't want to commit to this deal anymore. You don't have the power, you know, effectively your bargaining terms, oh, laborers, are not so good anymore. Mm-hmm. So then that leaves us today. Where are we? Who does have their hands on the wheel? You know, I mean, here we are, Cambridge, Massachusetts. Large portion of the population works in white-collar professions. Mm-hmm. Many of them are homeowners. In traditional, you know, there aren't a lot of traditional industrial workers in this room. On the other hand, the traditional industrial workers in Ohio or wherever are losing their jobs quite rapidly due to mechanization and offshoring. So, you know, who can put the worker's gun to the capitalist class's head anymore?
Good question, but I have to disagree with you on one thing.
And sorry to sound a bit tanky on you.
No, you're not saying no. It is the pertinent question, the one you asked. I don't have a splendid answer to it, I can assure you. But where I want to disagree with you is that in 1933 or 32, it was the labor movement that imposed its will using its power. There was no power. The 1929 the great crash and then the depression that followed completely depleted trade unions of any bargaining power. When you have a situation where you've got hordes of people outside the factory gates begging to be allowed into work at any wage, you don't have trade union power. So it was a political process that led, not a labor process, that led to the New Deal. And let's not forget that FDR was not a revolutionary leader, he was a patrician. Yeah, he was a bourgeois. Even Keynes, I mean, think about Keynes. Keynes hated the workers. He loathed trade unions. The reason why he introduced Keynesian economics, his proposals, which included increasing wages and welfare states and fiscal spending, on fiscal stimulus and so on, was very simple. He wanted to preserve capitalism, and he understood that capitalism was not very good at preserving itself. That's a very large part of the motivation of Roosevelt. It was not that he was being pushed by the industrial might of the labor unions.
Well,
So
Roosevelt
that
and
gives you
Attlee
a
both
bit
had
of
to worry about
a bit of hope.
communists.
Since that didn't happen then, maybe we don't need strong trade unions today. Today, I think that from a class formation point of view, what worries me and what I think is should be the objective is how to organize the precariat, how to turn those who live a precarious existence, the Uberized workers, into a political force, because they now are falling through the cracks of society. They are like the lumpen proletariat used to be. They are disappearing. I mean, a person who works 18 hours a day in an Uber is not a person. It's a lost soul. It's a moving, monument to misanthropy. So that for me is a major question. But okay, allow me just to be a little to shift towards something that may sound science fiction, but I don't think it is. We need to think innovatively about collective action. I do not believe that the revolution is going to come through trade unions in industrial sites simply because they are fading, unless the robots organize. And they do the revolution on our behalf. You never know. I've read a science fiction novel where the computer in the end organized the revolution. No, but let me give you an example. Today you have millions of people who are being exploited by public utility companies that have been privatized and which are financialized. And they have already sold to financiers the next 20 years of the electricity bills that you will be paying. And as a result of this financialization, your bill is going up and up and up, completely disproportionately to the cost of producing electricity, water, whatever. What if we could work out which financial derivatives, which CDOs are packaging the bills in a particular neighborhood and another neighborhood and another neighborhood, and we organize through the internet so that we can have an electricity bill payment strike that is timed in such a way as to explode those CDOs and make them bankrupt. Now that's a form of collective action, which is using the financial instruments of the, this kind of network against it. We need to think beyond that, modern times Charlie Chaplin.
Thank you very much. Very interesting stuff.
Kalispera.
Kalispera.
That's all the Greek I know. So I originally tried to do a PhD on the topic you talked at length about the separation between political power and economic power, specifically about the European Union and how it sort of formalized this split between the political spheres no longer has to do anything with what the people want with economic organization. No one wanted to touch that one with the 10-foot pole, so I'm doing something else now, but it remains my passion. But so to keep the question reasonably short, what is the one change, what are the one of the many changes you'd like to see in the structure of the European Union that could address this, if you could choose just one thing?
Right, well, I'll be very brief in my response. We need to federate. Because there are only two choices here. Either we break it up, which many people want, even on the left, thinking that that recoiling into the bosom of the nation state is somehow going to allow them to create socialism in one country. Yeah, right. Yeah. Or we're going to have to create, a democratic union. Now, the problem is that with this crisis that we have, which is both economic and political and moral, if you want, we can't have a serious discussion about federation because we have centrifugal forces that are pulling us apart. So this is why our movement, you may have heard of a movement that I'm part of, DiEM25. We're proposing what we call a European New Deal. A New Deal in order to stabilize and bring hope back so that we can have a discussion on how to federate.
Thank you very much.
I'm also going to ask a question about the European Union and about Greece and about the immigration problem, which is all the more on everyone's minds because of what Trump has just done with wiping out the agreement on the Iranian nuclear situation. I recently read that on the island of Lesbos, I believe, which is an island that receives a lot of the immigrants from the Middle East, Syria, that Greeks were attacking the immigrants. And I read that I have read for years now that conditions in the camps are terrible.
Yeah.
And something that I have wondered about for years is why is it the immigrants from the Middle East and North Africa are coming to the south of Europe, the poorest part of Europe? And why is it that there is not some common effort, perhaps this is a very naive question, but some common effort to subsidize countries like Greece, which is in terrible economic straits, to deal more humanely with these people?
It's a fantastic question. Okay, let me answer in three parts. Firstly, inform you about what's going on in Lesbos, because Lesbos is very dear to us as Greeks, to our hearts, and we are devastated by what's going on. Firstly, let me be fair to the people of Lesbos. The vast majority of the people of Lesbos have been magnificent. For 3 years now, it's an island that is very depressed, financially, economically. It's a bit like Detroit. Think of Detroit. And you have 1 million people. It's an island of 17,000 people, and 1 million people came. And most of them passed through. Now we have 50,000 left. And they went on the shore, they picked them up, they opened their houses, they opened their shops and gave them food, of course for no money and so on, the vast majority. Of course, when you have a combination of the Great Depression that we have in Greece, you have Nazis, and add to this the European Union's attitude, which is effectively to turn Lesbos into a concentration camp. And the Greeks who live there then become very susceptible to the toxic narrative of the Greek Nazis, who say to them, see, these bastards came here, and now we are, instead of being a beautiful Greek Aegean island in receiving tourists and doing well, we are ourselves part of a concentration camp. So it's very, very difficult to fight against this narrative. But I tell you what I think. So, the situation on the ground, there are 3 camps. One is called Moria. It is the most notorious one. It is a camp that can hold under reasonable conditions, not good, but reasonable. 2,000 people, there are 10,000 people now in there. So they live in circumstances that do not befit a civilized part of the world. But that's on purpose. It is run by the European Union and the United Nations, and it is a cesspool of misery on purpose to deter others from coming. There are another 2 camps that local NGOs have created, and they're magnificent. They're absolutely magnificent. If you look at the circumstances in there, the people, the problem they have is that they don't have much capacity. So there are 300 families in one and 110 families in the other. But they live. It's actually quite heartwarming to see. Of course, the problem is that none of these people have any kind of guarantee of safety. I was talking to activists in the good camps who educate them, teach them English, their own language, because they have kids who speak Farsi, Persian, and they teach them computing, and they put a lot of effort in it, and it's really heartwarming. But they say to me, do you know the tragedy of not knowing what's going to happen tomorrow morning, because the police may come in, grab one of them, put them in chains, throw them on the boat back to Turkey. So you have no idea. Is this kid, you have a 12-year-old kid there, and his or her parents, are they going to be with us for a week, 2 weeks, 6 months, 2 years? The refugees don't know, so they can't plan their lives. The activists don't know. So what do you teach them? You teach very differently if you teach somebody for 2 weeks compared to if you know you will be teaching them for 2 years. The curriculum is different, right? And the local community doesn't even know. Is this camp here going to be permanent? Are we going to assimilate them? Are we going to live with these people forever? Because the local community will react differently if they knew that, and with some support from the... They don't know. And the worst part is that, you know, the reason why I left the ministry was because my party and my prime minister capitulated to the loan agreement. But immediately after that capitulation, that's what usually happens. If you capitulate on one big thing, then you capitulate on everything. After that, he also capitulated and signed the European Union Treaty with Turkey, which is an affront to civilization. Because what we're doing is we're effectively, the West, civilized Europe, we are bribing an increasingly dictatorial president of Turkey to the tune of something like $7 billion, so that he allows us to violate international law on refugees. You know, according to international law of refugees, people coming to your country have the right, by international law, to a hearing that will determine whether they are political refugees or not. They don't have that right on Lesbos. Because the EU-Turkey treaty has deemed that Turkey is a safe country, so that when you arrive on Lesbos, you are not granted an interview as to whether you've been persecuted by the Syrian regime, by the Taliban, by I don't know whom. And you are kept there for an indefinite period. You are not allowed to go to the rest of Greece. You can wander around like a lost soul in Lesbos. But of course you live in the camp because there's nowhere else to live. Well, where are you going to live? On the beach? So it's purely horrible. But let's just take a broader look at that situation. You said the immigration problem. I don't see why immigration is a problem. I think that immigration is a great asset. From a European perspective, for 1,000 years, we have been populating the earth, we Europeans. We've been sending our ships and our caravans to the Americas, to Australia, to New Zealand. We destroyed all the indigenous people in the world. In Africa, we colonized. Okay, we created the new world. That's what we did. And we thought it was all right. Now what's happening is we are aging. We're becoming a sad, aged lot. Yeah? And the demographic dynamics are reversing. And and we need these people. We really need these people. Germany is being depleted. It's becoming another Japan. Greece, too. We have an economic crisis as well. You know, we are in a process of desertification. So we need these people. Instead of treating immigration, as an asset that we must collectively manage and find ways of making it work for us, Europeans, we are looking at it as a threat, and we are trying to imagine a huge wall, Trump-like, going through the Mediterranean, you know, the North Pole. I don't know what they're going to do. It's pathetic. It's just a complete failure of the imagination. It's misanthropy. And the result, of course, is that the taller and more impenetrable the wall that we create, the only thing that changes is more deaths and greater profits for the traffickers. It doesn't stop immigration. All it does, it creates insecurity, both in the local population and in the migrant population, and profits for the traffickers. So, let them in. And impose minimum wages, living wages in the countries of their origin. And if the countries cannot provide them, help them provide them. That's the solution, not walls.
Hi. I can't help but notice that we're talking about the continuum of capitalism while we overlook a graveyard. My understanding, which might be wrong, is that we're paying approximately $8 trillion for the wars in interest.
For the wars?
For the wars, U.S.
Yeah.
How does an economy overcome that? I mean, and how does that play out? 8 trillion in interest per year, if that's...
No, it's not 8 trillion per year.
It's not?
No.
Okay.
No. No. But what is your general concern? That we pay too much for what? For the debt?
Wars. No, I'm talking about the wars, just the wars.
Yeah.
All right, let me change.
Maybe it's 8 billion, but not 8 trillion.
Okay, then my figures are wrong.
3 zeros is okay.
Okay.
Well, look, the United States of America, as Eisenhower told you in the 1950s and warned you, is predicated upon a very interesting industrial policy. You don't have a formal industrial policy, you have something called the military-industrial complex. And the military-industrial complex is essential for American capitalism in the way that the American capitalism has been created. So the reason why Missouri and Massachusetts can be in the same union and you don't have the same problems that we have between Greece and Germany is because you have what I call a surplus recycling mechanism. You have food stamps, you have social security, and that means that money that is taxed in the surplus states is transferred to the deficit states, and that keeps a degree of balance. But the most important part of your surplus recycling mechanism is a military-industrial complex. So when Boeing gets a contract to build the new generation of fighter jets, quadrillions, yeah? The Pentagon says to them, yeah, but you're going to have to build the engine in a new site in Missouri, in the deficit places, you know, the plane, the spare parts of this and that over there, and so on. So to keep this going, you need some wars. I'm not proposing that this is how it should be. I'm just describing it. So in 1991, the Pentagon and the Treasury Department in this country had a major headache. The Cold War had finished. So they could no longer pass through Congress on the basis of national security the bills that were necessary in order to keep replenishing the cruise and Pershing missiles. So they had to clear the stock. So you had the first war in Iraq. And they cleared, remember the war had finished, and they were going into the middle of the desert and firing all the cruise and Pershing missiles to get rid of them so that they could order new ones in order to maintain. So capitalism is just a very rational system because it's a very simple reason why it's so irrational, because it has a productive capacity, a capacity to produce, which far exceeds its capacity to consume. So something has to make up this difference. And war is the result, not just lack of democracy.
Hi, thank you for tonight. Question for you. If we, theoretically, go back to 2015, you're now in charge instead of Cyprus, in charge of Greece. Faced with harsh austerity versus Grexit, what political path would you have chosen?
Well, you know the answer. That's why I'm here. I'm not in the ministry. Why am I not in the ministry? No. Why did I resign? Because we had an agreement. We had a very simple agreement. And this is the only reason why I accepted the finance ministry and to run in the election. We had an agreement that there were 3 possible outcomes. I'll put it succinctly. 3 possible outcomes. One was continuing debt bondage in the euro, which is what has been happening since 2010. For me, that was the worst possible outcome. Another outcome was Grexit, for Greece to be chucked out of the Eurozone or to choose to get out. This came with substantial costs, and it was never my proposal. But I always considered it to be better than perpetual debt bondage in the euro. When people say, but the euro is a strong currency, I say, yeah, well, if you're a pauper and you live under a bridge in New York, you have $1 in your pocket, it doesn't mean you have a strong currency. You have $1 bloody in your pocket, yeah? It doesn't help much. And then the first best, my ideal solution would be debt restructuring within the euro that would allow us to stay in the euro in a sustainable way and to end the Great Depression. So the point I was making was, no bluffing. We say to them, we don't want to get out of the euro, but we need a debt restructure and we need the end of austerity for Greece to remain sustainable within the euro. And that's what we want. And let's sit down and we will compromise. I did say to Obama when he said, but Янис, you have to compromise. I compromised. I said, I dream of compromise. But I'm never going to be compromised. There's a fundamental difference between the two. Okay? And we say to them that we are not going to accept that we are not putting our signature on another loan agreement that extends and pretends our bankruptcy into the future. So shoot us, kill us, get us out of the euro. We don't want to get out of the euro, but we consider getting out of the euro to be a lesser evil than staying under the conditions of debt. So Tsipras supposedly agreed with me, and not only agreed with me, but considered to be more right-wing than him, and more ready to compromise. And he had some reasons. Not that he was right, but you'll be very interested to hear that one of the people that worked with me during this period in creating the plan and the narrative against the Troika and the International Monetary Fund was somebody called Larry Summers, who was actually very good, because he understood that what was happening in Greece reflected very quickly and immediately in the European macroeconomic stance, which was detrimental to the interests of the United States. So we worked together with Larry Summers, and when we met, I said, I'm very glad you haven't read my last book. And he said, why? I said, because I referred to it to you on a number of occasions in the same book as a Prince of Darkness. And he said, well, at least you called me Prince. I've been called worse. So it's clear. Yeah.
The two organizations I like to follow side by side, the DM25 movement and 6 Degrees of Citizen Space in Canada with John Ralston Saul. And I just really enjoyed John Ralston Saul's book, The Collapse of Globalism. And he describes this idea of a positive form of nationalism that we haven't explored. We think of nationalism as negative, and we often only see negative forms based on exclusion. But our movements like DM25, imagining and exploring, possibly hijacking and displacing hate with positive forms of nationalism that are centered around inclusion and sort of collective missions like reducing inequality that can capture a lot of the people that are displaced in this country, the Trump voters that might not be racist, that just wanted a better deal. And they really fall in with the flag. When someone waves the flag, they're easy to be manipulated. They just feel that they must go with it. But now in this country, when you see 2 American flags on the back of a pickup truck, that's kind of a hate symbol. The left, progressive people that enjoy inclusion have maybe allowed the flag to get stolen from them. But then at the same time, we need to integrate nationalism, possibly a new form, with ideas like a federation, to gain more power back into the political sphere against, the financial sphere.
Well, let me say that I get your drift. I grew up in a culture where the left answered this question of yours a long time ago by making a distinction not between positive and negative nationalism, but between nationalism and patriotism. Our line was always, we're patriots, and the difference between a patriot and a nationalist, the patriot loves his country, and the nationalist thinks that his country has the right to steamroll over every other country. And I think that is a good way of resolving it. And also, but making this more contemporary, I think we have to appropriate the slogan, I want my country back. I think we should take this and say, yes, I want my city back. I want my neighborhood back. I want control over my city, my municipality, my state, my country. But the only way to get my country back is if others get their countries back as well. And if we all work together and we understand that to get our countries back, we need to resolve problems such as low-quality jobs, low levels of investment in the green transition that the planet needs, climate change and so on, that we need to fight poverty. And it is impossible to fight poverty in one country when it's rising in other countries. If you think that you can do that, you are deluding yourself. So in effect, to embed patriotism in a narrative which sees the major problems that society faces, like poverty, low investment, problems with the health service and so on, as we see climate change. What I mean by that is climate change requires local action, that we do things here in Boston, that we do things in Massachusetts, in the United States, but we have to act globally as well. And we need to cooperate. Because resolving poverty, as I said, can only happen at... the Bretton Woods system is a good example. Poverty fell everywhere throughout the global system of the Bretton Woods. Inequality shrunk everywhere. It couldn't rise in one place massively and fall in another. So we have to combine love of country, of neighborhood, of community, patriotism, with a transnationalism and internationalism that allows us to claim our own countries back.
A funny multinational question that I would love to hear answered from you. In the book, John Ralston Saul describes this concept where a lot of the trade that we have is fictitious. It is multinationals trading with themselves.
Yeah, of course.
And can you
It's called limit pricing.
Well, now, we were just creating these tariffs that might not really get to the root of the issue. We were punishing multinationals. We weren't punishing another nation. We were punishing multinationals that straddle two nations. And that not a lot of people in this country know how to think of these concepts and think of...
Well, I have a better way of punishing the multinationals. How about making the IRS do its job? Because if you go to Venezuela, bad example, if you go to Italy and make some money, you get taxed here. You are taxed by the IRS on your global income. You cannot say, I made $10,000 in Napoli, and therefore that's none of your business, taxman or woman. No, you get taxed on your global income in the United States, unless you're a corporation. And then you don't get taxed at all for the money you stash away all over the world. How about having the IRS do its job, instead of introducing tariffs that in the end have a detrimental effect on all of us?
The IRS can't
Yes, it can.
that.
Yes, of course
They
it
can
can.
invent the
Of course you can.
itself?
No. They need their marching orders from Congress. They need the politicians to say to them, you're going to treat... Look, the Supreme Court, in its infinite idiocy, decided that corporations and and individuals will be treated the same when it comes to super PACs and all that, right?
Yeah.
Well, why not also decide that corporations and individuals will be treated the same tax-wise?
Okay,
I remember a beautiful poster I saw in Texas saying that...
I like it.
No, okay.
We're going to take the last question.
I believe that corporations have human rights when I see one of them being hanged.
Yeah.
That was Texas for you.
Yeah, in the briefest and broadest of strokes, in the post-capitalistic world that you envision, what does the credit system look like, and how does it achieve equilibrium with the sovereignty of states?
Okay, how long do we have? No, but let me put it simply. If we have a system where private property is maintained over goods and services and things that give you happiness, but not over productive processes, and productive processes belong to those that work them, that are part of it, then you simply do not have a credit system. You don't need one at all.
And your justification for that is?
That credit is only necessary when you've got an asymmetrical distribution of property rights over means of production.
So you wouldn't say...
If you and I have a cooperative, if you and I have a
cycles?
cooperative, if we own a business together, we have a partnership, then I'm never going to be in your debt or you in my debt. We're going to be producing together, and we're going to be sharing the profits that we make, the economic rents.
What about investors?
Well, there will be no investors.
What about the other parts?
Because investors exist only because you have an asymmetrical distribution of wealth.
And so back
if you didn't have asymmetrical distribution, but look, this is going to be the topic of my next book. I have not written it yet. So I'll see you in 2 years.